go ahead and click record and see what happens. All right, yay. Well, thank you so much. We have somebody coming in that's joining right now, but welcome to the Big Valley Beekeepers Guild. This is our third or fourth Zoom meeting now. I'm not sure. And we are excited to have everybody here. We'll probably still get people coming on, so I'm going to watch for those and folks and keep admitting them into the meeting as we go. And let's see. So just some Zoom etiquette. Make sure to, if you have any background noise, definitely mute yourself if possible. You can also use the group chat to ask questions, although we'll have a little bit of time of Q&A. And you can also message people directly through the chat as well. And well, I'm going to add, there we go. I'm going to admit some more folks. We are, let's see, we're going to get started. Hi, Sandy, how are you? Sorry. When I could, oh, she's holding up a sign, but I can't read it. Or wait, I don't know if she's holding it up to the screen. I can't hear you. Oh, I don't know what you're saying. I can't read lips. Oh, well, that's all right. It's all right. It's great to see you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. What? Hello?
The unmute is in the upper right-hand corner.
Oh, there we go. I'll ask her to unmute. Or wait, did I unmute her? No, let's see. Unmute. Did I unmute? Oh, well, let me unmute. That means you have to unmute yourself, Sandy. Okay. All right, good deal. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. We'll get started really quickly. I'm hoping we can still see each other to the side. Okay, excellent. You should still be able to see our video depending on where you have it as well. So I will keep my eyes on the chat though. Let's see, there we go. Just want to make sure I can still see that. Oh, actually, where is my screen? All right. Oh, there it goes. I think it's behind here. All right, I'm just gonna move it up here. We see the waiting room, admit and admit. There we go. Okay, I think we're good. So welcome to the Big Valley Beekeepers. We are meeting the second Thursday of every month currently through Zoom. And we are excited to have everybody here. And so I'm gonna go and continue to admit people as they come into the waiting room. We are, let's see. Sometimes there's always a little bit of a delay. Any news or updates really quickly? We have, we are currently looking for another location. And this is because as much as we love the Village restaurant in Lodi, with the social distancing requirements, even if they were actually open right now, we'd be pretty challenged to be able to hold a large enough meeting. And it's not enough, we were already outgrowing the space before. So we are looking for another space that we can use at no charge, hopefully, or in exchange for some publicity, that kind of thing, some marketing. We would love to find a place that we can use, such as like a hotel conference room, that kind of thing. But we will need, we need some help finding those. So if you have any ideas or any connections, if you have even, maybe there's a sponsor out there that wants to sponsor us with a hotel meeting room and wants to pay the meeting fee. That's totally a possibility as well. So we'd really appreciate everyone's help with that as time goes on. Any other news? We do have, let's see, we're going to continue to do Zoom meeting, at least for our next one in August. We do have Elena Nino coming from UC Davis, who's going to speak to us through Zoom. So, and she's actually going to talk to us about feeding bees and about dearth, or dearth, dearth. So we're looking forward to that. And we're hoping, with fingers crossed, we might actually be able to begin in-person meetings as soon as September. We've been tossing around a couple of ideas, including, you know, maybe the use of someone's donated backyard and doing them outside, that kind of thing. So if you have any ideas, please feel free to message us. All right, so there we go. And of course, make sure you're part of our private Facebook page if you're local, and if you've attended one of our meetings, we'd love to have you involved in the discussion as we go from in between our meetings. Oh, yes, and we're also looking for donations for the Zoom meetings. They cost about $15 each time, so if you'd like to be a Zoom meeting sponsor, please let us know.
I wanted to mention, I believe you have masons down in your area, and you should ask them.
Oh, really? Good idea, Daniel. Oh my gosh, masons. Okay, great idea.
They're probably closed right now, but they generally have a large meeting area.
Thank you. No, I might. Do you know anybody in the Lodi area by chance? I'll reach out to you back channel and stuff. That would be great idea. Thank you very, very much. So tonight's meeting, so we are going to focus on what can go wrong with your hives. And in this discussion, we really wanted to figure out, because we get a lot of questions throughout the year, right? Posted on the Facebook page or in other groups. And it's all about trying to figure out, you see something in your hive, and then what are the options, right? What options do you have to figure out what to do next? And it can be kind of complicated. And then we tried to think of, okay, what are really the most common things that happen in our area especially? So we thought that a guest panel would be a fantastic way to kind of dive into this. So we actually have five common things, most common things that could go wrong. And we're going to kind of talk them through almost like a think tank to figure out what might be the best or possible courses of action. I don't really want to say best because of the fact that all of us have different beekeeping experience, and there's that saying that if you ask 6 beekeepers, you're going to all get the same question. You're all going to get different answers. But so at the end of the day, you're going to have to make an educated decision about you and your hives. But for now, we want to kind of gain some knowledge and some possible ideas and resources from our local experts. Paul Lockhart was going to join us, but unfortunately he's feeling under the weather, so he will not be on our panel tonight. But we do have Mark Allen from Bee Honest Farms, and we also have Daniel. And Daniel, I apologize. I'm always afraid to pronounce your last name incorrectly. Can you pronounce it for me?
Well, it's Schoenthal.
Schoenthal.
That's why I go by DW.
There we go. We'll just call you DW. And DW is basically Blue-Green Horizons. If you haven't followed him on YouTube and Facebook and I think Instagram, everything, make sure that you do that. So, and same thing, Mark Allen, you have a page for your Bee Honest Farms, correct? A Facebook page? He's like, yeah, I think he's still on mute. You want to unmute? You got it?
Yeah, I do have a Facebook page, and I'm redoing the website, so it looks like some kid just started a new website. So
there you go. Hey, it's better than nothing. So between the two of them, they're going to give us some of their knowledge and experience about what we would do about these different things. So, all right. So let's get started. Let's see. All right. So here we're going to start out. I'm going to let basically what's our format is Mark and DW are going to, I'm going to read the scenario, and then Mark and DW are going to take turns, kind of talking us through what they would consider first. What would they look at? What would they evaluate? And really then what would they consider as a solution to these common problems? I'm going to watch the time a little bit, but we have about 10 minutes to spend on each one. Give or take, and we can always, whenever you guys, Mark and DW, if you're ready for, if you finish your discussion, if you're ready for Q&A related to this, the number, let me know. So we'll go through. So the first one is, my hive was booming in the summer and was still really big in the fall, yet it's winter and I found hardly any bees left. There even seems to be mold on the cluster of bees that are left in the hive. So Mark and DW, go ahead.
This is the end, and we need to know what was in the middle. We've got the beginning and the end. Mm-hmm. A lot of reasons for the bees to drop, but there's also a lot of reasons to suspect moisture. But what was it the last time they looked, and how long ago was that?
Right.
Good question. So let's work through the scenario. So like so maybe they, well, we know that it was booming in the summer and it was still pretty big in the fall. So let's pretend fall here is maybe October. So let's pretend that it's now November. Maybe it's been a month since they've been in their hive. I don't know, what do you think if you had those pieces, what would you think then?
What's the mite load?
I always think mites. If you've got issues in winter, you've got food. The bees were looking good before, especially in summer. That's, and it's like I talked before at that meeting sometime in spring. I think it was spring. It's never the mites so much as the viruses that they're vectoring. So those viruses are vectored in the late summer, and then all the bees have that and take that into winter. So that's about the time that their life gets shortened. That's also the time you need bees to last several months, and they don't. So that's when all of a sudden you see this hive that was doing great, they just fall over dead, metaphorically speaking. And as far as mold, I mean, that's our only time that we're wet is spring, late winter to spring. So any kind of moisture is going to cling to any type of nutrient, and that's going to be in the wax from the pollen and from the nectar. So the nectar and the pollen together are going to mold. Mold is not an issue. People see the mold and they start to freak out because that's not something I would want to eat either, but the bees can clean it up. The mold is not an issue for the bees. What caused the lack of bees in the hive? That's most likely from the mite load. And the usual thing that you hear about this time, oh, well, I treated in fall, so my bees were clean. But they treated, but they used, that doesn't mean you got rid of all the mites. So you need to know before and after what your mite load looks like. And that's probably number one. There's several other things, but yeah.
Going along with what Mark said, it is the viral load. And just killing mites one time in the fall is going to have no effect on the overall viral load and the ability for a few mites to, keep infecting the next generation. You need to have essentially 0 mites for a period of time to clean up viruses. So it's not, I have low mites. You have to have no mites for a period of at least 2 brood cycles to get rid of a viral load in a hive. If you start early in the fall, you can do that, or perhaps better, get rid of the viruses before summer so that if you do have a high mite buildup over your supering period of time, you don't have that corresponding high viral load, which means now you're going into fall healthier. But if you don't completely clean the slate of viruses at some point early in the year, you're going to have a high virus load, even with moderate mite load.
And I think the Mark and DW thing that struck me is that if the hive was booming, yeah, okay, what does that mean really? But if they felt like they had a very high population, that whole time that the population was building, the mites were increasing, right? If they weren't treating or anything. So maybe the first thing they would ask themselves, okay, well, when was the last time you treated and how effective was that treatment? And now, now that you've gone into winter, if you suddenly go into your hives, it's like what DW asked about, okay, how long has it been since you've been in there? Because how long did it take for this to happen? And if you are found that all of your bees are dead or they're gone and there's only a small cluster left, then yeah, there was something, all of these factors kind of led up to where you are now.
Sheree, can I add one more thing?
Oh yeah, Sandy, go for it.
Yeah, so what people should also understand is just the life cycle of both the bee and the mite. We're soon peaking for the life cycle of the bee right now. Another couple weeks, the bee population will just start to naturally decrease. And what people are not aware of is that this is the exact same time when the mites themselves are actually in their population increase. So as the bees are decreasing, the mites are increasing. So people are saying, wow, I have this big booming hive. Why did it go down so fast? And the reason why are the bee population is decreasing and your mites are basically overwhelming the bees. And then also directly, exactly what DW said, it's the mite load, or it's the virus load that lingers in the hive. So even though you've killed off your mites, you still have viruses. And if you have sick winter bees, if you have sick bees going into winter, your winter bees are going to be sick and they're not going to make it out the other side of the season.
There we go. Very good. Does anybody have any questions about this one? Or questions for our panel?
Somebody asked what they can do about mites, and I know that we can probably spend the rest of the hour talking about it.
Yes, true. Very true. Very true.
And
all right.
Is everyone familiar with the Honeybee Health Coalition, their decision-making tool? So that's a fabulous tool for deciding what type of treatment you want to use on your hives. So it's basically a flow chart. They ask you a question, you answer yes or no, and it's just a process of elimination depending on whether you want to use synthetic miticides or organics and whether you have honey supers on. So you just keep answering the questions, and then at the end, they are going to show you the treatment options that you have available. So it's a really super good tool, and I highly recommend everyone looking at the Honeybee Health Coalition. They have a whole guide for varroa management as well as their decision-making tool.
Good deal. Sounds good. All right, I think we're ready to go to our next one. All right, so number four. Number four scenario is I went in to inspect my hive and I found it not only being robbed, but completely overrun with pests such as ants, moths, or hive beetles. Who wants to attack? What would you guys think? Mark and DW, how would you like to tackle this first?
Well, first of all, ants, moths, and hive beetles are symptoms, not a cause of the failure. So we, again, have to go back to what it was beforehand and before that. You know, we need a timeline of stuff. These are symptoms of what caused the collapse. Could be anything, including dearth, failure of a queen, etc. Again, viruses, mite load. Healthy bees can take care of ants, moths, and hive beetles.
So DW or Mark, go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was going to say a strong hive will take care of the last three there in that ants, moths, hive beetles. Luckily, I don't have to deal with hive beetles. I don't run into them in my location. I did down south. Moths are almost never a problem. If a moth is a problem, it's your hive. You know, it's stronger. And ants can be an issue. We have a really weird ant here. You know, when you move to a new area, you find out what the new insects are. I have ants here that are a problem this year that I never had a problem with, even in the last 5 years I've been here. Tiny little ant, about half the size of the Argentinian ones that I used to have down south. And so small that the bees don't seem to, take care of them when the bees get small. A large hive, like the bigger the hive, the biggest population, ants will not be a problem to them at all. There's such a pheromone concentration in the hive that the ants can't usually navigate inside the hive. So that's usually the best way. I mean, you could always, if you are having an ant issue, you could either take care of the ants themselves, try to put a barrier if you've only got a few hives, you know, which the sticks and the oil with the tuna can, that kind of thing, make a moat. Or try to really seal up the hive as best you can with tape and things like that. So there's ways around that. As far as being robbed, that's definitely a girth issue. Again, a strong hive will be able to take care of itself, but if you don't have a strong hive, then, you know, you're going to have to really batten down the hatches. And maybe that's just because somebody near you has a lot of hives that are robbing out your hives. So that's a big topic that we could spend a lot of time on, is robbing in, you know, September and August. So maybe we'll hit that again.
Yeah, I find with robbing, particularly if you have the common 4 to 6 backyard hives, it's really important to keep those hives balanced in terms of strength. Something you can do in the summertime is to be swapping brood frames from strong hives to weak hives. If all those hives are equal, you're going to have much less chance of robbing. Plus, you shouldn't have the weak hive to be available. So balancing your hive, particularly when you only have a few, is a really easy and smart thing to do. I liken it to when I had livestock of the 4-legged kind. You know, we changed the pasture size, you know, to keep, you know, this grass grew better, so we put more cows there. This grass didn't, we put less. And you do the same thing with bees, but we do it by moving brood frames.
So Cherie, what I see in this question is that basically we don't know why this is a weak hive. And that's the question to be answered, because all of these things that we're seeing here are secondary issues. If you have a strong hive, they don't happen. So the big question is, why is this hive weak? And we don't have enough information here to say.
Mm-hmm. We don't. And that's kind of the, so what kinds of information would be important? What are some of the things you'd really want to ask? So if somebody called you or somebody was asking this question, what kind of information would you guys want to know or want them to make sure that they had available to figure out what to do next?
My first question would be mite loads.
Got it. It always comes back to that, doesn't it?
I would want 4 to 6 months worth of inspection records.
Oh.
I need a direction.
Good idea. Okay.
If the population was booming and getting bigger and bigger, then, you know, most likely we've got a viral load issue, you know, with mites. If it was getting weaker and weaker, now do we have a bad queen? Do we have EFP? I mean, what's in there?
Right.
Direction. Right. The other thing that's really crucial is whatever you're seeing when you do an inspection, you have to remember the bees have been living with for several weeks and they've made an adjustment. They're trying to fix it. And so you need to be thinking ahead. If you see brood, what is that brood going to be like in 2 weeks? You know, they're going to be hatched out. The bees are ahead of us because they've got hour-to-hour information. And we've just got spot information. So you have to not react to what you see, but react to how the bees are reacting to what you see.
So how often do you guys recommend that, recommend that people actually go into their hives and do a hive inspection?
Well, at the quarantine center, I'm in them every 2 weeks, but that's an unusual situation because these are cutouts and swarms, and we're trying to prepare them to be healthy enough to, you know, pass on to other people or put out in a regular apiary. But monthly, once you've got it down, every couple months, but you really have to have it down if you're going to go more than a month or two between inspections.
How about, I know, Mark, when you were first getting started, how often were you in your hives?
Too much.
Oh, too much.
Too much. I was in my hive when it was new, you know, I was in it yesterday. Can I open it again?
Yeah.
No, I'd say every other week,
Yeah.
especially for new people. Because you're not going to be able to react fast enough.
Mm-hmm. Because of the
You
bee
go in
man.
there. Now, you know, I also tell anybody who's new, and they get very defensive, because I would have too, that you're almost absolutely going to smash a queen. I mean, it's
Right.
almost a given. And oh, I didn't kill her. It's, yeah, you probably smashed her. No, I've never smashed a queen. Well, you probably have. So that's just a thing that happens, you know. The other thing is that this right now is a big stressful time for bees right now. There's several stressors coming together, and especially with food turning off, that's another stressor. So right now you'll have a lot of people looking in their hive, can't find a queen. And usually when it's a stressful time, you start to lose queens. So whether the beekeeper did it himself, or you can blame it on several other things, which usually it gets blamed on. Now is the time to make sure you've got a queen, make sure there's food, all the little things like that. So while you're trying to figure out why am I even in this hive, you know, you're supposed to have a reason to be in the hive. One of them is to make sure that they have food incoming, or that they have enough food there. We live in a very strange area. So when you read things about bees, you're expecting areas where water falls from the sky, and we don't have that. So unless you are in the city where you're irrigating and replanting Home Depot plants all the time, you probably are without food, and they're going to start feeding on what they normally would store. So
Hold that thought, Mark, because I think you might be you might be thinking of some of our other scenarios too.
I want to mention one thing that Mark touched on, and that is queen rolling. And I was lucky enough to 30 years ago go to a lecture at Oregon State University by somebody who studied queen rolling, in that they would videotape people working on hives, and then when they rolled a queen, they'd go back and observe things. And what they observed is that the technique you use for removing a frame from a hive is really critical. You do not kill the queen so much on pushing a frame down as lifting a frame up. So the key that they came with was you remove an outer frame, you move the frame that you're going to lift into the open slot, and then slowly lift it up so that you're completely free of the other combs. That's the best way. Then of course you can put it down in the open slot and pack it, but you don't be pulling a center frame up without having that space.
Without room.
So your technique, and I see a lot of hobbyists, boy, they get a hive tool in their hand and it's like demoing tile, you know. Pick it in, lift it up, pull. And it's like, boy, and Jeff has taught me a lot about incredible slowness is really good when pulling frames, you know. And in our cutouts, we're 100% catching the queen this year. And it's pretty much because we go through it slowly.
Okay.
We remove combs slowly. We give the queen a chance to exit the work area that we're using. Then, of course, we know she's going to go be at the last spot in the hive, but by giving her a chance to leave, you know, we're not, you know, dropping her, spilling her out on the ground, et cetera, et cetera. And she can run, but you've got to give her the space to do so.
Got it. Good tip. Well, and DW, I want to circle back too, because early on you said, you know, if you were working with someone, you'd want to see, you know, you would want to see 6 months worth of hive inspection records. And I think that's a really great reminder for everybody about how important it is to keep records, especially even if you just have a couple of hives. It's amazing how quickly you forget when what happened. And so making the effort, making a point to, you know, when you get back into your living room, you know, and you're write out those notes, right? When you treated, what you treated with, you know, when you were requeened, who did you get your queen from? You know, all of these details. And the dates are really, really important in what you notice, because it's amazing how quickly over time information will evaporate. And I know there's even been times when I've, you know, talked to DW and he's asked me a question and I'm like, I don't know, I need to go back and look. And so it's made me, even myself personally, keep better records just because it's necessary.
Eggs, larvae, capped brood, and stores. If nothing, a simple indication that there's eggs, larvae, capped brood, and stores. You know, everything else is helpful, but you need to know the dates on those things so that you can understand the population dynamics and the direction.
Right, got it. All right, does anybody else have any question about number 4?
I have one thing to add to the rolling of the queen. So Randy Oliver is always talking about, you know, when they're building drone brood at the bottom of the frame, how it sticks out wider than the frame. He calls those queen killers, because to the point, when you're lifting up, the wax that is sticking out is what's rolling your queen. So after you've pulled, you know, after you've created nice space and pulled your frame up, it's also a good idea to kind of scrape off that wide wax on the bottom of the frame.
And there's surely nothing wrong with, at the beginning, removing 2 frames from your 10 frame and giving yourself a really big space. That's so simple to do. And then if you get better, you know, only remove 1.
Good deal. Thank you. All right, we're going to go on. Anything else to add about number 4? No, we're good. We're going to go on to number 3. There we go. All right, so number 3, I did an inspection of my second hive last week and noticed that the bees were louder than normal. It's been hot and dry for weeks now, and not much seems to be coming into the hive by the foragers. So Mark and DW, what are your thoughts on this? What would be the first thing you'd want to ask or take a look at?
Dearth-induced stress.
What is that? What is that, DW?
Bees normally react when they're consuming their stores differently than when they're bringing them in. And right now, I have 3 or 4 hives, big hives, that I know are dropping, and you can walk by them and tell them. You can hives.
And is it truly more loud?
Excuse me?
Is it more, when you say that you can tell, is it by the sound? You can hear them?
Yeah, I mean, they're noisy, and I know they've got a queen. So,
okay.
but they all have small entrances on them here, so I'm not worried about robbing.
Oh, okay, good deal. Mark, what are your thoughts?
Well, I just ran through about 30 hives real quick right before I came out. I must have finished pulling out some queens that I put into some nurse hives, and it's the whole gambit. So one hive will be loud, you look into it, you know, and reactive, and another one seems to not care that you're there. They have about the same amount of stores, and some have more pollen right now, some have more nectar. So I mean, as you run through numbers, you start to see that there's all sorts of different versions. So it doesn't seem to be so much a constant thing like you would think if you had 3 hives, right? And you see the same thing 3 times, but if you run through 30 hives, you'll notice that it's from hive to hive, right? Especially in a dearth, like right now, because out where I'm at, there's nothing right now.
Right.
So the last thing we had was, you know, a Chinese tallow tree, and that was about it. So it's pretty pretty dry out there, and so I'm thinking about having to put more money into feed. But you'll notice some of the hives are doing great. Those are mostly the ones that robbed from somebody else. So they're doing great, while another one doesn't look good, right? And that comes down to making sure that everything is as equal as you can, and making sure, you know, that you've given them enough food, because the ones that are weak are going to get weaker, and the ones that are strong are going to get stronger. So I don't know that I catch loudness without opening up the hives as much as those ones are just crankier. You know, there is science to it though. The bees do make a different frequency from when they're not having issues to having issues. But I think again, that's hive to hive, what that frequency difference is. So they do have equipment people have come up with, you know, to monitor hives. That way you'll know when something goes wrong, kind of thing. They haven't been able to market it really well because of the cost, but that is something that that does happen. I don't know that you can tell from one person to another. I think it's subjective. So that's my answer.
Yeah, no, good deal. Well, and I think a lot of people, I think, go into beekeeping think, you know, what they read is that they never want to feed their bees ever, and they don't realize that it has a lot to do with where you're located, right? What's available for the bees to forage on, and knowing that's going to help you be successful with your bees more than anything. I know that when I was reading about dearth, they were talking about the behavior of bees. Sometimes you'll see them more kind of low to the ground, and that instead of having an intent or purposeful type of behavior, they get more almost distracted. And you'll find them going to flowers more than once. Usually bees are very specific, they're very direct, they're on a mission, right? And so they're very busy, they're busy bees. And when you see them kind of just hanging around, that could be a sign of a dearth. And kind of hand in hand in this, I know even for myself, I'm not confident that I know when we have a honey flow going on, right? So I'm wondering if both you, DW and Mark, if you guys could talk about, you know, what signs do you look for? How do you know if it's, you know, if the flow is on?
Well, when I was doing honey, we had a scale in each apiary, and that told us what was going on. You know, sometimes we'd have to move the scale because it wasn't on the best hive or whatever, but we had a single scale in every apiary, and could pull back then it wasn't a USB drive, but we could pull the data from it with an RS-232 connection, I believe it was, and got our daily weight. And that was really clear. You really can't go lift up your hive every day. But it's probably the most important thing is having some forage mapping, keeping track of the numbers. Beekeeping is the most local of all livestock out there because it's really dependent on that 2 to 3 mile circle. And the best thing to do is keep track. And if you're a hobbyist, you can walk around the block in the evening and jot down what trees and stuff are blooming when, and you combine that with what you see in your hive and you can develop a forage map.
Sheree, another thing that you will look for is white wax inside the hive. That would be an indicator that the nectar flow is on.
Oh, okay, okay. Are you talking about on the frames or up on the top, on like the inner cover?
Kind of both. You know, when they start capping the honey, if it's nice pure white wax, that's usually a sign that the nectar flow is on. And then you'll also see them, you know, building burr comb under the top inner cover. But again, it's the really pretty white wax that you'll see.
Got it. Mark, how about you? What's been your experience as well?
So you're asking, how do I know when the nectar's on and when it's off?
Yes. What do you see the bees? Yeah. How do you tell?
So the longer you're in an area, or the longer that you have that apiary, the closer you'll know. Every year is different, but you kind of have an idea, especially if they're going to stay in that one spot. So you'll know when they generally are going to start blooming, when things are going to go dry. Just like I know when all of a sudden they're going to hit that dry pollen out there. I have as an indicator of when to start doing patties, because I actually need them to stay big because I'll go into pollination in spring. So I need to know when they need, and I know that it'll be September. So it's always September. So I just kind of have a knowledge of when things are going on in my area. Also, everywhere I live is gridded. And probably the same for you, Cherie. It's all very much farmland. So it's a grid and feet for miles, right? So we kind of know that, hey, look at that. Somebody planted alfalfa. I wonder if they're going to be lazy and there's going to be flowers for it. They're going to be right on their job and cut it right before I need it. So, so you'll have an idea of everything going brown where we're out to, you know, from green to that tan brown that we get, the golden hills, and have an idea, oh boy, we're all of a sudden going to switch and we're going to run out of nectar. And then when I'm in the hive, so when you start to see that's a lot of wet nectar reflecting back, right, versus little splotches of capped honey, you know, then you know something else is coming in. And then the activity of the bees, because when it's in dearth, you don't see a lot of activity in the middle of the day like you do when they're coming and going. So you'll see them at the end of the day when everyone's home, but the middle of the day when it's nectar's going on, you'll see a lot more activity going back and forth. So
I think beekeepers forget that, you know, the urban environments are actually really great for bees, because in urban environments, there's so many different gardens and places for bees to go forage that are close by, right? They're extremely local. And so that's why urban bees actually tend to do, I think, sometimes a little bit better for hobbyists, because they're have such an abundance of food available to them. And it's usually throughout the year, because people always want things blooming in their yard, you know, no matter what time of year it is. And it's not as that yellow color, those fields of yellow that we have here in central Northern California. So.
Well, if farmers put as much water on their fields as homeowners do on their little lot, we would drain the ocean.
We would. That's so true. That's so true. Oh gosh. Yeah.
And it's different, you know, from one farm area to another. I have another apiary down in Stockton, and not too far away actually from Greg Johnson's house. And it is so different than where I'm at right now.
Oh.
So I've had to put on another 4th box onto 2 of the hives, rather than just take it off, and I just left it on there. Wow. So I went, and I threw another one on. So I didn't think I was really going to get much honey, and it's making honey like crazy, the stronger ones anyway. Whereas at home, we're not making any honey. There's nothing here. So,
yeah. I want to ask. I know both Sandy and Cindy are up in the mountains. What are things like where you guys are right now?
Drying up where I am. I'm at 1,500 feet in Shingle Springs.
Oh. I used to live close to there.
Oh. And how about you, Cindy? She might not. She might. You're on mute if you're talking. Oh, wait. There we go. All right. It's all right. We'll come back. Well, good. Well, any last thoughts about feeding or anything like that, or any other evaluations that you would do, like of the hive and when it came to feeding, and knowing when to feed what? Maybe that's a good question.
I have a question about feeding.
Sure.
I'm finding that there's no pollen at all on the brood frames, and the there's very little, nice, wet, glistening larvae. So there's not a lot of royal jelly. So it tells me that they need protein, but yet I find a whole frame of pollen like on the outer edges of my hive. So, I feed them pollen patty, but why are they not accessing the pollen that they've already brought in and stored?
They don't need it.
They don't need
They
it?
don't need it, even
They-
though,
They would access it if they need it.
but
so-
if you look at the larva, they look so dry.
Probably they need nectar.
Yeah, I'd say they need more moisture, nectar. They may not have enough nectar to make bee bread, which they're usually storing more bee bread on a pollen frame than pollen. It's not dry packed usually on the brood frame. It's bee bread ready to feed.
Right.
So they don't have, if they don't have nectar, they can't make pollen into bee bread.
Okay.
Okay, that's good to know.
And the fun, I don't know if we have more, I'm not looking at the list of questions, but they'll always need, all the bees in there always need nectar. They always need honey. And when it comes to this time of year, you might have pollen, but you also need nectar at that time of year. And sometimes it's a good idea to throw in some feed, that type of thing, but you don't generally need to put in a pollen patty unless you're trying to get them to start up again where they weren't before.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah,
I had another thought, but I lost it about halfway through me.
that's okay. We did have a question coming in. We did have a question come in from Lynn, and she asks, so is it during the dearth that you want to start feeding the sugar water?
That depends. If you still have honey on and you want to extract that honey soon, then I'd wait. If you're worried more about the bees than honey, then yes, you'd feed. If you wanted to do honey, I'd pull the honey off, what you can out of it, and then leave the rest. Once you start feeding sugar, they're going to mix it all together. So, well, that was my other thought. The honey this time of year won't stimulate brood production. So just because you have honey above won't mean they're going to think of it as incoming nectar. So incoming nectar is one of the things that stimulates the queen and the rest of the workers to do brood production. So obviously they need a protein source, but they also need incoming nectar. So otherwise they'll think dearth. And in a dearth, they generally slow down their production, especially if you have certain types of bees like carniolans. They're very good with food hoarding. They won't produce if they don't have any food to do it, whereas Italians like to just produce no matter what, even to their own detriment. So little changes, between one type of bee and another. But in general, just because you have honey above doesn't mean that the bees think of it as, oh, we've got plenty to make bees with. So that's where that 1-to-1 syrup comes in. 1-to-1 syrup, even if it's an internal feeder, as funny as that sounds, they'll assume that is incoming nectar, or at least it's a stimulant for brood production versus just having honey above.
How important is it if you are feeding sugar syrup to keep up with the demand for it? Like if you let them run out, is that okay?
Yeah, in fact, it might be a good thing if you are constantly feeding, but you're not paying attention to where they're putting it, then you can cause them to start getting honey bound.
Oh.
So that's where they start to put nectar, and they sort of make a honey out of it in areas that would normally be the brood. So then they run out of places to put brood. So this time of year, you can still have swarming. Everyone thinks we're on downhill slopes, you're not going to have swarming. Anything that constricts the hive, and feeding can do it. I just looked at a hive and I went, whoa, look how strong this thing is. And sure enough, it's ready to swarm. swarm cells all over it. There's nowhere left. And I said, well, I've been doing a great job here. Sure. So anytime you can get a swarm, and one of the things is feeding too heavy. I tell everyone, always on a new hive, it's a good idea to feed. But later on, they'll ask as they keep putting gallons and gallons and gallons and gallons in, should I stop? I said, yeah, probably. I mean, is there any space left? So those are the same things even on this time of year. If you're putting in hundreds of dollars into a hive in syrup, you're probably putting in too much.
Yeah, that's probably a lot. Thank you. DW, any final thoughts about this one, about this number 3?
Yeah, I wanted to mention one thing, and this goes to something Mark was saying. Nectar is a brood stimulant, and there are some reasonable studies out there that show some of the essential oils that they add to some of this pro feed and so on and so forth does increase the brooding aspect of the feed. I am not a major user of supplements, but I have seen that this year on some hives that I'm intentionally feeding. And it does seem, the essential oils do seem to encourage the brooding. I'm actually somewhat surprised.
Very interesting.
So it may be the oils that they're bringing back in the nectar from the flowers as part of the chemical response. And of course, those are pretty much gone in honey.
Yeah, very good. Good deal, thank you. So really quickly, before we move to number 2, just a quick reminder that you're more than welcome to use the chat box if you want to ask questions, or you can always pipe in at any time. And Debbie is keeping track for us who's on the Zoom call. So she might reach out to you through the chat to get your email address. And that's just so that we can keep track of who's here. I know Karen, there's someone here named Karen. Karen, check your chat box because Debbie's probably trying to reach out to you to see if she can get your email address as well. So just keep an eye on that as we go through. So let's see, we're gonna go to the next one. So number 2. All right, so number 2 is, I am so excited. I found a queen on the frame, but where are all the brood and the eggs? Why are all of these cells empty? So how many times have we heard beekeepers have this happen? And so what would you ask, and what would you help them evaluate? What would be the questions that you'd want to have answered to figure out what to do next?
Were there ever eggs?
Oh, okay. All right.
From this queen?
Okay. All right, so let's pretend yes. What if there were before?
When was the last time you were in this hive?
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. So let's see. Let's pretend the person was in the hive about 4 weeks ago.
All right. Yeah.
And all was well?
Let's see. Let's see. I'm just throwing this out there. I don't know. You could say maybe this person, they saw the queen but maybe they didn't see any eggs, but they saw definitely capped brood before.
So there could be swarming. That's a very common thing I find in hobbyists. Mm-hmm. One thing we talk about in doing some of our projections about swarms is a commercial farmer, if 5% of his hive swarms, he's doing good. 10, 15%, he might want to, tighten up some management. I frequently see 50% of hobbyists hives swarm. Wow.
Wow.
They don't know it, but the signs are there. I've gone in, there's no larva, there's no brood. I mean, there's capped brood, there's no eggs. and there's a queen. And I'm not good, both because of eyesight and other things, of telling a virgin queen from a bred queen. But I do know if there's eggs, she's bred. You know, so swarming is often a cause of quote, a collapse. Here in California, we have an issue that we didn't have in Oregon. Oregon springs are slow and steady and so on and so forth. Here we can have hot, cold, you know, and the failure rate of virgin queens down here is much higher than it is in Oregon. They much later in the year in Oregon, but much more assured of good weather once we do get, you know, queens. But I see swarms, hives that have swarmed in second week of February through the end of August here.
Wow. Wow.
And I'll tell you, in the second week of February, it's there's not a good chance of that virgin getting bred.
So what, GW, what do you think causes that? Is it our climate that causes that?
Yep. Yep. Well, as Mark will know, it's not hard to actually brood all winter long here in the Sacramento Valley. That's a huge benefit for people wanting strong pollination hives. You know, I can't do that up in Oregon. They're going to shut down for sure. But I can split in the fall and have strong hives in the spring. With feeding, manipulation, and so on and so forth. Whether those costs are worth it is a secondary question, but you can do that here. But I'm going to have queens available if I'm splitting in the late fall or if I'm splitting before pollination. And I split 30 hives this year before pollination, but I had 30 queens.
Wow. Yeah.
They overwintered double deep, and you know, you could split them, but you couldn't get a queen.
All right. So Mark, what are your thoughts?
So yeah, this time of year, you know, you'll see that. You could run down the gambit of possible situations. The first one I always think of is swarming, especially because most of the new beekeepers are in a residential area. The residential area right now hasn't had an issue where everything went dry. So there's food almost 12 months out of the year in a residential area for the bees. If I could not have issues with people, I would drop bees all over residential areas. I would just drop a pallet right on your front lawn there, put another one across the street. That would be great. I'd make money like crazy. So, so yeah, that the swarming is going to continue. I ask a lot of people, no, the hive didn't swarm, but they weren't in it in a month. And it was big before that. They probably don't even notice that, you know, they lost some of it. It's usually it swarmed and they didn't notice, and all of a sudden the hive starts to crash and they think it was pesticides, and they go down this list of things, and it just simply swarmed, and the new queen wasn't any good, or new queen didn't come back, or there was a month long where there wasn't really any brood happening, and that will only catch up with the hive a month after that. So there's always that lapse period that makes people think of what's happening now rather than what happened a month ago that's causing what's happening now. So it's very difficult for people to put it in their head. What didn't I do a month ago that's causing my problems now? Yeah. So.
Well, I want to say two things one about swarming. First of all, happy bees swarm, and hobbyists tend to have happy bees, and then they feel bad that the bees left them. They're not cats and dogs. When they're happy, they reproduce and they head out. And so I get that from hobbyists. They go, I thought they were happy here. And I go, yes, they were. Happy they left their children. But the other thing we should talk about on number 2 here is what to do about this situation. And the first thing that if I pulled a hive, even if I found a queen in there, that I had no eggs or larvae in it, the first thing I would do was balance this, is throw a couple frames of brood and larvae in there. Otherwise, I'm going to have a population dip that's going to affect nursing, foraging, wax building, etc. for some time. So the thing to do when you find no eggs or larvae, irregardless of the queen, is balance that hive. The biggest benefit we have is that, you know, without much work, I can take 3,000 capped bees from one hive and walk it over and insert it into another hive. That's a huge, huge tool. Will do several things. One, if this queen is failing, they'll use the eggs and supersede her, and you can read the brood frame for that. If the queen is laying, she's going to be stimulated to lay more with eggs and larvae and capped brood in there. It's going to fix this situation or give you the information that you need to understand what happened.
BW, would you, when you're pulling that frame of brood, you know, to add to this colony, are you shaking off the nurse bees or leaving some on?
Let's say I'm assuming the hive is strong, but just without, then I'm not worried about moving nurse bees over. If I'm moving a large number of nurse bees over from a queen right to a queen right hive, I'm going to have to, you know, do a little bit of manipulation there. I don't need all those dead bees in there either.
Oh, right.
Either I'm going to separate the brood for a few days by putting them a couple frames in a nuke box, you know, for 24, 48 hours, and then I'm going to move them into the queen right. But if there isn't a queen, I can move the nurse bees or not. It doesn't really matter. Now, if it's a weak hive, I'm moving the nurse bees because I need to have bees to take care of the larvae. And even though bees can move backwards and forwards to some degree to fill job vacancies, as they would say, they're very inefficient at it. So there's nothing more enthusiastic about feeding larvae than a young new bee. There's actually some good science as to why that is. There's a chemical addiction that the nurse bees are gaining from feeding the larvae, cleaning up the larval waste. So it's almost, you know, like an addiction. That addiction isn't there when you have a wax building, a guard bee, forager bee, reverting back to doing nursing jobs. Some of the work out of Davis shows 25% efficiency. So there's nothing more efficient than that young nurse bee for taking care of larvae. So if there isn't a queen, then move the larvae. And then let them make a queen. Move the nurse bees, I mean.
Yeah, I always do. I always move the nurse bees over. I used to shake them off. I stopped doing that years ago. You can move over a frame without any nurses on there. Capped brood, which you think is going to emerge within a day, and you can come back and find all the outside of that is dead, never came out, right? Because the nighttime became a lot cooler than you thought. And so, the only thing to keep those bees warm at night are other bees. So if you don't have enough bees to do that, that's another reason why you see what you think is bad laying patterns is actually just not enough bees at night. So then you see these, where this section here died out, and then she went and backfilled this. Now you don't have that beautiful frame everyone likes to show, like behind you, Sheree, the one you have in your picture.
Yes.
Somewhat uniform, right?
Mhm.
If you had a period where some of that wasn't, it'll always be off, or some will be coming out and then being backfilled. It won't be until you get a period where she doesn't backfill that eventually you get that solid pattern again. So that can happen just based on not having enough bees in there. So it might not be your queen, you just don't have enough workers right now. So I move them over, and then I guess the cautionary thing is, when are you moving it over? What time of day? Because if you do it at the end of the day, all the bees are back. So you're not moving over nurse bees anymore. You're moving over older bees too. But if you were to do it in the middle of the day, that's going to be nurse bees on those brood frames.
All right, good deal. Any other questions or thoughts about this one, about number 2? No? And we're going to look in the chat box, see if there's any questions there. All right. All right, so we're going to go to number 1. What is number 1? And I'm guessing that most people could probably guess what this might be. And it has to do with queens, right? That seems to be the center of our universe. So for number 1, it's May. We'll pretend it's May, and the nuke I installed last month should be doing great, but I can't find the queen anywhere.
Were there eggs and live brood on that nuke?
Let's say yes. When they installed it, let's pretend that yes, it was a fully functioning nuke.
Rolled the queen on install?
Possibly.
Not uncommon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or she was left behind in the box.
Times, the 4 or 5 times you went to go look at the bees again in between. Yeah.
In the first 2 days, you mean?
Yeah, right.
That's exactly. It's funny to me because I think especially when it comes to new beekeepers, they tend to either be in the hive constantly or they're afraid to go in it. And it seems to be one or the other. And so trying to find that balance. I think there was one person I talked to maybe last year that said that they were going in there every couple of days because they thought that's what they had to do. And I was like, are your bees grumpy when you go see them now? Because they're constantly being disturbed. But that's, I think, this question kind of just taps onto, there are times, anytime, whether it is that you have a brand new nuke or throughout your beekeeping, you could go in there and suddenly there is no queen. And I know for myself, last year, it seemed to be that I was replacing queens constantly. I'm like, what happened to them? Last year, I spent a lot on mated queens, but I would even find them, I swear that I found them dead in my water trough. Sometimes at the bottom of the brood box, or bottom of the box on the bottom board, just crazy stuff. So, and then the key is really, I think, monitoring, because, okay, how long has it been queenless, right? Because then you've got to figure out, okay, what's the next step? So DW and Mark, so what are some other questions you would ask?
Well, one of the first things that I think of when a hobbyist calls up and they tell me they bought a nuke is there seems to be in California a wide understanding of what a nuke is. And to me, a nuke is a nucleus hive. And that means the queen in there has laid those frames. It is a family, it is bonded, it is producing. If you do not know the person you're buying the nuke from, shook nukes are incredibly common here. And that is basically where they grab a frame here, frame there, throw them all together and drop a queen in there. But she may be a virgin. She may be a virgin that's expired, can't be bred in that cage, or and one of the dead giveaways is you buy a nuke and the queen is in a cage and they tell you, oh, she's in there for safety of transportation. You know, and it's like, really? So it's really the second thing besides rolling the queen when you installed the nuke is where did you get the nuke?
Right.
Very, very critical. And I don't want to blame California, but it's something I didn't see until I came from California.
Huh.
And I bought 30 nukes from about 5 different people when I was first building up a group thing. And it was really clear, you know, the 4 nukes from here were shook. And I'd asked them and they said, yeah, that's how we do it. You know, no, a nucleus hive. If I want to buy a package on frames, I'll buy a package and put it on frames.
Right. Right.
You know, but a shook nuke is not a family.
Established. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there's what the understanding of what a nuke is. That's why all the nukes that I've sold, you know, I let them know exactly what I'm giving them. And a lot of times they said, these are totally different than what I got before. And so, but what did you get before? So, yeah, I make sure that if you're going to get a nuke, at least it should be 3 at a bare minimum frames of brood, because that's really what you're buying, right? And it should be that queen for that brood. That way, you know, I mean, that's one of the best things about the nuke is that she's already laying, and there's the proof of how well she's laying. Those are her frames. So if you do get one of those nukes where it's got a queen cage in it, you probably shouldn't be paying full price for it. It should have been established before you did it. And what I've seen is 1 or 2 frames of brood, an empty frame, maybe a little bit of nectar, and then and then they throw it out at you. So that's not so much a queen issue, just as much as that's not really that much of a nuke. It's going to take longer for. If you start with 5 frames of brood, you'll get to 10 frames overnight. If you start with 2 frames of brood, it'll take months to get to that same amount. It's not a linear number. It's exponential. So, as far as other questions I would ask, you know, you installed a nuke, can't find the queen. There could be a number of reasons. I would say it's probably the beekeeper, but I mean, that's just the reality of it. I can't see enough stress where if the queen was there when you put it in, like she didn't get smashed in transport from A to B to the hive. If she was alive and in the hive and doing her job, walking around at least, then there's not a whole lot of things that would cause an issue outside of ants came in, because they'll go out after the queen a lot of the time when you get too many ants in there. But I mean, those are all weird things that happen, not so much the norm.
Well, and part of my thought too, when I was looking at this was, so if the person installed it last month, you know, okay, how many times have they inspected the hive between, or the nuke between now and then, right? And when was the last time they saw eggs? Because, you know, how long has it been? Because now if it's been a long time, now you're faced with, okay, you know, how do I get a new queen in here? The queen's truly gone. And I'm curious about what your thoughts are, both DW and Mark, and Sandy's welcome to weigh in here too, about, you know, when it comes to having to then install a queen, you know, I've seen it be disastrous. I've seen it be very successful. So do you have any tips or hints or tricks, like as far as installing new queens, mated queens?
One thing I thought while you were talking there is, there's also the people that say that they can't find the queen. That doesn't mean the queen is there. It is
Right.
not, right?
Right.
This is another good reason that as soon as I would see number 1, I would move a frame of brood and eggs in there.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Then they're going to tell me if there's a queen in there.
Right, because if this was a nuke that was sent over, it's going to have some sort of open brood in there,
Mm-hmm.
or eggs, right? So if there's no queen, but you don't see any queen cells, why was that?
Oh.
So is she actually in there and not laying for whatever reason? Or did you get a bum nuke, that really wasn't what you, because if you got nothing but capped brood, that's not really helpful either. You're going to get this massive rush and then this drop in population. So as far as installing a queen, I've done thousands and thousands and thousands of installs of queens now over the years. In fact, I just did this. So, oh, you can't see it.
Oh, there we can. Oh, okay.
15 in there.
Wow.
Those are going out. Those aren't coming in. So I've got to ship those. But as far as putting it in, of course, it depends on what kind of cage that you have in there. But if you have any brood frames, put them in between. If it's a wooden cage with the screen facing down. I haven't had the issue, but it's always a good idea to try to tilt it up a little bit so that the entrance with the candy, if you're using candy, is facing up a little bit, but with the actual, like I said, screen facing down towards ground, right? Wedged between the 2 frames. If it's a brand new frame, either wood or plastic, there's absolutely no comb yet, then it's best to try to find a way to wedge it, hang it, any of those kind of things. So now you can get really inventive with stapling and pieces of metal or tape or just because sometimes, if this is like a brand new package install or something like that, just the wedging of the 2 frames, if it doesn't do a good job or it gets moved or falls later on that night, screen face down, she dies. So making sure that doesn't happen. Now, if you have actual comb and you wedge it, that won't happen. So really get that wedge good. And it doesn't matter if that's brood right here that you're smashing in the process. It really doesn't matter. Go ahead and do it. Usually at the top of the frame though, that's honey. And having the honey like pour over the cage is actually a good thing. That really pulls the bees to her. So as long as that is facing down. Now, if you're using plastic frames or plastic cages like these, sorry, I've got props. So if you're using plastic cages,
Oh, okay.
right? So these ones right here, you can kind of put them anywhere because this whole area here is mesh all the way around, sort of like a hair roller cage, which I'm sure I've got some of those too. But I know I do. Saw one. This will have the candy, right? You can wedge it like this, skinny, or you can wedge it like that between the comb. But it really doesn't matter with this kind, how you do it. They can get to her. Just as long as you leave wherever the queen is, she's only going to get fed through either the screen or this mesh that's plastic. So you have to make sure that the bees can access that. And that the end she's got to come out of, that there's a way that she can get out. So if you block it somehow and they can't get her out, you'll find out the next time you're in the hive and she's still sitting in there going, hello. And then you'll have to let her go. So I should grab more props.
DW, what are your thoughts on the whole queen installation?
We cage a lot of queens from all the cutouts and rescues that we do. I don't use California cages anymore, but I use the plastic ones that Mark showed. Roller cages are also, you know, I usually have a pocket full of those around too. But those I have to release, obviously. I do know that if I've got a tough hive, that I'll cage the queen on some comb. I'll take her actually out of a queen cage and cage her directly on the comb. It seems that when she has access to a couple square inches, she's going to spread out more of her pheromones, possibly even start laying. But I haven't really had much introduction problems compared to what we used to have 30 years ago. The other thing is, you know, if you're putting a queen in there, you've got to know it's queenless.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, oh, and there's also a rule that I go by, and that is the more expensive the queen, the less likely she's going to be accepted and be killed.
That's quite possible.
Percentage wise, I've lost a lot more $200 breeders than I've lost $1, you know, queens.
Right.
I actually have a frame that's completely enclosed in a queen excluder, so I can put a regular frame inside, and then it's completely wrapped with a queen excluder on both sides, so that I can put a breeder in there and let her, you know, lay for a while before I let her out. Like I said, the more expensive, the more they seem to want to leave.
And the more expensive, the closer you put that to your house too. So you can,
Yeah.
so I grabbed a 3-hole cage too, because this is what most of the hobbyists run into. So a 3-hole cage, right, with the candy. Same thing though. Wedge it between the 2 frames, like so, facing down. And that's the best way. That way you don't have things fall in here and start to, like, honey will pour in here, and now she's going to be covered. She just has to be covered with honey for it to be a problem. She doesn't really have to drown in it. This way they can access the queen facing down. They can access, and wedging it in between is probably the best way to keep her strong. And then obviously you have the cork missing on the candy side.
And what I used to do with those Californians is I would staple a toothpick across the solid wood side, about a third down from the sugar, so the sugar was up. And then that toothpick would prevent them from ever falling down.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
I have some pictures somewhere. When I started, I had a cage like this, and I was following some book. So I got nails, nailed it in here, and then bent it so that it would hang just right on, you know, so it wouldn't hang above, it would hang just right. It was a lot of work just to do what you can shove it into the wax. Live and learn. So
Good.
I have a picture of all these nails, you know.
All right, so I'm wondering, so any other last thoughts about this, about queens, or if your queen is suddenly gone or missing or anything like that? Any last thoughts about that? No? Okay. So I want to make sure that we open it up to any questions that maybe people brought with them, because this is a great time to get that Q&A right while we have everybody here. Just before I forget though, of course, our next meeting is going to be August 13th with Elenia Nuno from UC Davis. So keep in mind that one will be coming up, and we'll send out an email and everything too. So so everyone's welcome to unmute themselves. Anybody bring any questions with them that they'd like to pose to the group? I know I brought one, of course. So, so what I've noticed, so right now I have the 5 hives, and 3 of them are pretty steady, pretty strong. They've moved up to the 2 box, to the second box, and they're doing pretty good. But I have 2 that I can definitely tell are a little bit behind the game, and they started to fill the first box. I added the second box, and they have kind of moved up, but they have not filled out that top box as quickly as I thought they might. And so I'm curious about what everyone's experience has been as far as how long is it usually, or maybe on the average, take for a colony of bees to fill out that second box, that top box?
Boy, that's everywhere in between. That could be, a couple of weeks to months, so because it's both how much incoming nectar and how much, the population of bees that are actually in the hive, right? I guess you throw in the third thing, is it all drawn comb, or is it brand new foundation? A lot of times they'll see foundation and not think much of it until one starts, because they'll add pheromone to the wax on new wax. It tells the rest of the hive that there's new wax. So, that's where maybe throwing in even a frame. Doesn't have to be, people like to do the mix and match kind of thing, but if you just drop one of your frames that's honey or partial honey, that'll at least pull some up, and then you can watch them to see if they actually have enough pressure of, we've got incoming food to do it, or if you're on the downhill slope of incoming food. So
one thing to consider is when you do add that second super up there, you're changing the thermodynamics of the nurse, the brood area tremendously. Not commercially, because I've always kept my hives pretty tight when I had a large number of them. But as far as a hobbyist goes, if you want that to expand out quicker, I would vertically checkerboard the lower box and the upper box. That is, move, let's say, 3 frames of your brood up to the center above in the second box, and drop some of those frames down to the outside of the first box. That will better balance the brood temperature and encourage them to build faster, both up and out. That's a lot of work for commercial, but you've got a couple hives. It's a very simple technique to improve the population dynamics of that additional super.
Well, and then a follow-up question to that too is, it's funny because I've always read about how, in the winter, you're supposed, because we don't really have a winter here, but we're supposed to, the colonies get smaller. We're supposed to kind of, maybe they'll go down back to 1 box, and then, in the springtime they'll expand. They'll go back up to 2 boxes. But realistically, here and where we are, do we even really need to do that? Is it really just truly based on the number of bees, and maybe if they move down into the lower box because it's a smaller colony? I guess part of it for me is I'm worried that, what if it becomes a smaller colony, but now it's spread between the two boxes?
Well, as the colony gets smaller, for me, I'll knock that box down. I don't want them to have a big hive. Unless you're in the growth period. When you're not in the growth period and they have 2 boxes, but there's only in like half a box worth of bees, they shouldn't have 2 boxes. So that becomes, one of them becomes storage somewhere.
Yeah.
And because you want to manage the space. And so if the bees are, for whatever reason, not strong enough, maybe it's January, right? Then I'd knock that down to a single for sure. And some folks will do the same thing when we've got a single and it's not looking good, knock it down to a new, and all of a sudden that looks great through winter, right? So
right.
Yeah, the 3 main things that we can manage that increase our survival over that of feral bees, which is actually fairly small, is we can manage space, food, and temperature. you know, and by managing those three things alone, of course, now we have pests, but, or a pest that is different than we had in the past. But managing those three things is what gets bees to survive better than in the wild. You know, they can't change the space of the hollow tree. They can't change their infiltration. They can't, you know, cool it down if the top of the tree is blown off. But we can do those things. And those are what makes the difference between a 70% failure rate of feral bees and hopefully a 25% failure rate of managed bees. It's those three things. So manage your space, manage your feed, and you know, down here it's more absconding from heat than you know, cold. But I do see a lot of moisture, which is a ventilation issue here in the Sacramento Valley.
Okay, good deal. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, DW.
And I'll tell you, if nothing else, you know, get yourself, there's nothing wrong with taking, if you don't have a nuke, you know, and you're down to 5 frames of bees, fill the box with bricks, but don't give them empty space. You know, collapse that down to what they can manage. Follower boards, bricks, you know, fill that space.
Good deal. Thank you. Thank you.
So I had a bunch of notes from last night. I forgot your list.
So, say that again, Mark.
I've got a list of things on Word here that I'm going back to. This time of year, water stations. So I'll bring that up again. Make sure you got water for your bees. Because I think it was 100 degrees today. I didn't even look. It was hot. So some sort of water will make all the difference, because they're sending out bees just to get water every day. And mites, we already talked about this. Actually, you know, it's kind of funny. We went through most of these things. I said dearth, and we went, you know, feeding syrup, robbing bees and ants, queens missing, water stations, mite counts, inspecting too often or not enough. We actually said that, and record keeping. Kind of the things that I threw out there, things to do.
Yeah.
And, you know, with record keeping, make it as simple as you're actually going to do. So if you get a big, complicated thing and then you get your gloves on or whatever, and then you don't do it because now you've got your hands all waxy, well, then that's not going to help you, because you're not actually record keeping, because you don't want to get the paper messy. So then you're trying to remember after the end, and you go, I don't remember that was number 5 or number 3. So as simple as you're going to do it. So if it's nothing else than had a queen, doesn't have a queen, it has a brick this way or a brick that way, do it. If you want to say when you put the queen in and you got out a crayon and you put it on the side of the hive, do that. Some sort of record keeping will make the whole thing work so much better, because you're not going to remember. I never do. I always say I'm going to remember, this is easy. And then I look back and I go, I don't remember if I took it from that hive or not. So.
You know, that happens quite a lot. In fact, I sometimes even I'll forget. Melody, could you, sorry, Melody, you're sharing your screen. Could you please undo your share screen?
Do that or we get to see what she's got.
Oh, there we go. Okay. I fixed it. I'm not sure. There was, what was I going to say? Oh my gosh. That I've totally forgotten by the time I got back to my house. And so what I sometimes will do, I always have my cell phone with me, you know, when I'm out at the hives. So I'll actually take a video and record myself. Okay, this is hive number 1. This is what we did, you know, what I did. Hive number 2. And then when I get home, I'll transfer it over into my, you know, I have literally, it's yellow. Well, you can't really see it, but like it's my notes. The other thing too is that I always have a plan. So when I write in my log, I'm not only writing what I just did, but I'm like, okay, what do I need to check for in 2 weeks? You know, to remind myself, because I don't want 2 weeks from now to go, what was I going to do with that one again? And because my hives are not directly where my home is, I have to cart stuff in the car back and forth. So for what I found is that helps me tremendously, because I know what I need to get ready. You know, if I know that one hive might need another honey super, I'm going to have that ready to go for that day. If I know that I'm going to probably need, you know, to feed them some pollen or something, some pollen patties, I have that written down, because I'm trying to get myself into the habit of, you know, thinking ahead, right? Understanding the bee math that DW always talks about, and understanding what needs to come next, right? So you're really forecasting. You're trying to do the best job you can with the information you have. And there's no doubt that you go out to your hive sometimes and you're like, wait a minute, that was not what I planned at all. Turn around back home, have to get, you know, A, B, and C tools. Okay, go back out there because something unexpected happened. So that's always possible.
So something I do with the 4-H and Girl Scouts that we're involved with, because we give a lot of bees to those groups, is because it's easy to find calendars these days. I mean, if you don't get 10 of them at Christmas time, you're probably not on enough lists. I keep a calendar with each hive. And we always do pairs. So one person takes notes on the calendar. You know, we've got some little codes for larva and queen and so on and so forth, and frames of brood. But that's left with the hive in a big Ziploc bag. And so before they go to the hive, the first thing they do is pull out the calendar. So it's there when they open the hive. They read what the last month or often a week was, but it's if nothing else, just a calendar, you know, and just Ziploc bag, calendar, put a pencil or a pen in there, and one for each hive. I mean, if you've got 4 hives, it's really not a problem. It's for commercial, and you can't do a data search, but at least it gets the information, and you can always pick it up once a month and transfer it into your computer system or your app or whatever. But it also teaches the 2 young beekeepers, young ladies often, a process, and that is to communicate about what's going on. And if one person tells another person, I see eggs, I see larvae, then they're paying attention. And the other person can give feedback. Oh, how much brood was that? Or, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So the team method with a calendar is very effective for beginning.
Very good. I wish organizations like the California Beekeepers Association would come out with calendars. I haven't seen them do that. Maybe I'll email them and say, hey, you need to sell calendars. But like even the CDFA, like they put out a chicken calendar every year. And so it's funny that you say that, because we recommend, you know, as people with their chickens, if they're treating or they, you know, they want to keep a record, it's a perfect idea. So.
So there you have a fundraising idea.
I know. Oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to write it down.
No, really. I mean, the one that I found the best that I used for a while when I was building up was a weekly day planner. You know, and I just grabbed some sheets, you know, and I didn't need to know what happened in between, right? So just a weekly day planner, and the week of this, I inspected that hive. And just 5 sheets, 6 sheets in a Ziploc bag and a pencil, you know, and it's done. But like I said, what I realized when I was out there, quote, teaching these young people, was that the communication between the 2 people, the one making notes and the one looking, was almost more important than the notes themselves, because they developed a process of what I'm doing and being very purposeful in the hive.
Good deal. Thank you, DW. That was fantastic. I love the calendar idea, and I love using the Ziploc bags. I know I do have some blue tape on my hives, so, and I always have a Sharpie, so I'll like write on that sometimes, like just to keep track. But it's worth it. No matter what, it's worth it to keep those records and keep that information. So yeah. Oh, all right. So gosh, I'm looking. Is there anybody else who has any questions they want to ask before we get ready to wrap up? No? Are you sure? All right. Well, very good. Well, I want to take a moment to thank Mark and DW. Just a reminder, Mark has his own Facebook page called Be Honest Farms, and then we also have DW. Yes, we have DW, and definitely follow him, like his page, the Blue Green Horizons. He is responsible, and his team, I don't know, DW, I don't know how big your team is, but they will do some amazing extractions. So incredible. And they are just amazing pictures and information that he shares. He shares it on our page, but there's a lot more on his page. So definitely go there and visit that and like that. So, but we really appreciate your time. And if you think of any other questions, feel free to go to our group, private group Facebook page. And there you can post questions in between our next meetings and stuff too. So, all right. Fantastic. Well, everybody, thank you so much. Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Cindy, for joining us from El Dorado. And everybody have a wonderful rest of your evening and stay healthy.
Good night.
All right. Take care. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.